Well, happy Tuesday morning to you, everyone, and welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. Hey, thank you so much for all of those of you who have already ordered a copy of Revelation Realized, Martyr Vindication from Genesis to Revelation by Sam Dawson. This is an excellent study of what is admittedly one of the major themes of Revelation. I mean, the concept of martyrdom runs from Revelation 1 to Revelation 22. And yet, as I've noted, many commentators, while they sort of acknowledge that theme, they completely ignore what the rest of the Bible has to say about it, what Jesus has to say about it. So Sam's done a great job in this book, bringing all of this information together in an easy to read, easy to understand, and very powerful presentation on martyr vindication as it relates to the millennium, as it relates to the second coming, as it relates to the resurrection, as it relates to the end. Really need a copy of this. Now, as I said, don't even have it on my website yet. Regular price is $21.95 plus $4.95 shipping. However, until the end of the year, the price will be $19.95. You can send the funds to me through PayPal at jdon@cableone.net. Just send me an email through my website and ask for specific instructions. But you'll enjoy this book. All right. We are looking at the fact that in 1 Corinthians 15, I've shared with you that Paul was addressing the scoffers who were denying resurrection to a certain specific group of people that Paul calls the dead ones. And I called attention to the fact that some of our modern day scoffers point out, and they say, look, Preston, Paul is talking about Jesus' physical death. He's talking about the physical death of those who died before Jesus did. Therefore, physical resurrection and physical life must be the focus. But I've already shared with you that that's simply not tenable. Go back and see yesterday's video on Jesus being the first fruit. But I pointed something out that is absolutely undeniable, but which commentators, some of the most noted Greek scholars in the world, for instance, Anthony Thistleton in the New International Greek Testament Commentary, one of the most highly recognized Greek commentators available, and they come to the undeniable reality of this. In 1 Corinthians 15, Paul uses the present passive indicative to speak of the resurrection of the dead ones. Now, what does that mean? Present means it was going on when Paul wrote. Passive means that the dead ones, whoever they are, were being acted upon, i.e. the resurrection. Indicative means it was taking place. So what does Thistleton and what do all of these Greek scholars who all believe in a future physical resurrection, what do? Well, this is very difficult to deal with, they tell us. Well, you reckon? In the traditional view, it most assuredly is difficult to deal with because they can't deal with it. Because here's what it would mean. If we admit, if we honor the present passive indicative 10 times used in 1 Corinthians 15, that means that if Paul is talking about physical death and physical resurrection of the dead ones, then it must be the case that the dead ones, let's just broaden this to say, well, if the general discussion in 1 Corinthians 15 is about the resurrection of dead people, period, okay, not a specific group, but if it's about the resurrection of any dead, all of the dead, then Paul is affirming that it was already taking place. Really? Present, passive, indicative. Would anyone want to argue that the resurrection of anyone and everyone was already taking place? Well, look, that's what the present passive indicative virtually demands. So, what do we have? We have people saying, well, that's just kind of an anomaly. That's just kind of an idiosyncratic use of the present passive. And it raises the issue, well, what about the other Greek tenses in 1 Corinthians 15? Oh, by the way, what about the other present passive indicatives? In 1 Corinthians 15, verse 2, Paul says that the Corinthians had received the gospel, and he said it was that by which you are being saved. Present passive indicative. So, were the Corinthians, when Paul wrote, being present passive indicative, saved? Or was that strictly a future tense? Was it a past tense? Well, it was a past tense. They had accepted the gospel in the past. It was a current, present reality, but it was also a future reality because it was not yet consummated. But we cannot deny the present passive indicative in verse 2. So, that raises the question, why and upon what basis do we just arbitrarily come to the other uses, the 10 other uses of the present passive indicative in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and say, oh, we can ignore that. Well, maybe we ought to ignore some of the other present or the other Greek tenses. Notice what Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. Verse 24. Then comes the end, when he delivers the kingdom to God the Father, when he puts an end to all rule, all authority and power. Well, do we honor the Greek tense there? That is indicative from Paul's perspective of a future event. If we can ignore the present passive indicatives, why can't we ignore the future aspect of this? Watch this. For he must reign until he has put all enemies under his feet. Well, now wait a minute. This is the present indicative. Infinitive, actually. Which literally means he must continue to reign until he has put all enemies under his feet. Do we ignore that? The present infinitive? Oh, and by the way, verse 27, he has, that's an aorist, he has put all things under his feet. Do we ignore the reality of that already? He has put all things under his feet, but he must rule until he has put all enemies under his feet. Do we not see here an absolutely dynamic and absolutely irrefutable already, but not yet? But in already, but a present, looking for the not yet. Look, folks, Paul's use of the present passive indicative, the tenfold use of the present passive indicative is not just some anomaly. It's not coincidental. The Holy Spirit was not using those present passive indicatives in a sloppy, arbitrary, meaningless manner. If we want to make that accusation, we can make the same identical accusation in regard to the aorist tenses and the future tenses. I suggest to you that there is a very, very powerful and absolutely undeniable reality of the present passive indicative. Oh, by the way, 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 9. Paul says, we had, of his experiences that had been going on, we had the sentence of death in ourselves, that we should not trust in ourselves, but in God, watch this, who raises the dead. Present, passive, indicative. That's 2 Corinthians 1, verse 9. Once again, this is not sloppy, and it's not arbitrary, it's not capricious. So here's the question. Once again, if Paul in 1 Corinthians 15 was talking about the resurrection of all people at the so-called general resurrection, anyone, everyone who has ever died, if we honor the present passive indicatives, then it demands that Paul was saying that all they had to do to refute the scoffers was just simply to look around, and they would just see dead people popping up out of the grave everywhere. Really? But listen to me, it is because of the view of a future physical resurrection of physical bodies coming out of the grave. It is that belief and that belief alone that causes the scholars, such as Thistleton and others, great Greek scholars, to they admit they struggle with this. And to say, well, you know, what we have to believe here is that Paul was saying that the process of the defeat of death was already underway. Thank you, Mr. Thistleton. But that destroys a futurist view. And we've got more. Don't forget, order your copy. Exegetical Essays on the Resurrection, Sam Frost. Normal price, $17.95 plus $4.95 shipping. For those who watch my YouTube and Facebook videos, total price, $15, postpaid. Contact me or just order the book off of my website, BibleProphecy.com, with a note reminding me that you saw the offer on YouTube or Facebook, and I'll refund the shipping. All right? Thanks so much for joining me. And in the morning, on the flip side, I'm going to share more with you to show you that as the present passive indicative must be honored. We'll see you on the flip side.